I would like to give all praise and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai. Ba'ashem means in the name of. Yahweh Shai is the son of our the Most High, Yahweh, okay, who people ignorantly call Jesus Christ, is Yahweh Shai. That's the correct Paleo-Hebrew name, okay, of the Savior. All right. I want to also thank the elders, the brothers, the Akim out there teaching and preaching throughout the earth, okay, with truth and sincerity. Excuse the glare, okay. I have a quick lesson here. I'm not to receive any proceeds or any measures of payments regarding this video that I'm going to share. I'm going to open up with the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 32, and I'm going to read verse 7. Remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations. Ask thy father, and he will show thee, thy elders, and they shall tell thee. Okay? When the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set a bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. For the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob, is the lot of his inheritance. Okay, so Jacob had 12 sons, which are the progenitor of the Israelites, the 12 tribes of Israel, and Gad, okay, and Reuben. That's what this and who this video is about. The so-called Native American Indians. And I say that in particular because they are Israelites. They fit all the curses in Deuteronomy 28, okay, from 15 all the way to 68. All right, and then also 2nd Ezra chapter 13. That's 2nd Ezra chapter 13. Okay? All right? So let's get one of those curses. This is the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28, verse 45. Moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee, and shall pursue thee, and overtake thee till thou beest destroyed, because thou hearken not unto the voice of the Lord thy God, okay, to keep his commandments and his statutes which he commanded thee, okay, and they shall be upon thee for a sign and a wonder, and upon thy seed forever. Okay, I'm going to jump down to 49. The Lord shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the ends of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth, a nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand. Okay, I'll keep reading. Verse 50. A nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of old, nor show favor to the young. I'll play the video now.
I was adopted by a white missionary couple.
I was adopted.
Immediately placed for adoption.
I was in foster care with one family for 18 years. They were white.
My parents loved us, and I understand that, but at the same time,
they took the idea that they were saving
us from ourselves.
Being saved, and I should be grateful for the life that I've been given, because any child on the reservation would give anything to live as I was living.
They took us away from our mom. They came marching right in and literally took us and thousands of other children from their home.
It's a way to eradicate us. And to go to a nation's children is one of the sure ways to do that.
The U.S. has a long and brutal legacy of attempting to eradicate Native Americans. For centuries, they colonized Native American lands and murdered their populations. They forced them west and pushed them into small, confined patches of land. But Native Americans resisted. A Board of Indian Commissioners report said, instead of dying out under the light and contact of civilization, the Indian population is steadily increasing. And that was an obstacle to total American expansion. So the U.S. found a new solution to absorb and assimilate them. It all started with an experiment and a man named Richard Henry Pratt.
He had in his charge some prisoners of war, and he taught these men how to speak English, how to read and write, and how to do labor. He dressed them in military uniforms and basically ran an assimilation experiment. And then he took his results to the federal government and said they're capable of being civilized. So he was able to get this project funded.
In 1879, the government funded Pratt's project, the first ever off-reservation boarding school for Native American children. His motto was to kill the Indian and save the man. What started there at the Carlisle Indian Industrial School was nothing short of genocide disguised as American education. Children were forcibly taken from reservations and placed into the school, hundreds, even thousands of miles away from their families. They were stripped of their traditional clothing, their hair was cut short. They were given new names and forbidden from speaking their native languages.
To take our children and to indoctrinate them into Western society, to take away their identity as indigenous peoples, their tribal identity. I think it's one of the most effective and insidious ways that the U.S. did do harm to indigenous peoples here, because it targeted our children, our most vulnerable. And they tried to make us ashamed for being Indian, and they tried to make us something other than Indian.
There are also accounts of mental, physical, and sexual abuse, of forced manual labor, neglect, starvation, and death.
My great-grandfather went to Carlisle, and nobody in my family ever talked about it. So if you Google Indian boarding schools, the majority of the pictures that you will see will be actually from Carlisle. Colonel Pratt created propaganda. He hired a photographer to create those before and after photos to show that his experiment was working. So it was, intentional propaganda.
And it worked. The Carlisle model of education swept the country and led to the creation of over 350 boarding schools to assimilate Native American children.
On the one hand, we have the Navajo as we find him in the desert. Few of these boys and girls have ever seen a white man. Yet, through the agencies of the government, they are being rapidly brought from their state of comparative savagery and barbarism to one of civilization.
In 1900, there were about 20,000 Native American children in these schools. By 1925, that number more than tripled. Families that refused to send their kids to these schools faced consequences like incarceration at Alcatraz or the withholding of food rations. Some parents who did lose their children to these schools even camped outside to be close to them. Many students ran away. Some found ways to hold on to their languages and cultures. Others, though, could no longer communicate with family members. And some never returned home at all. By stripping the children of their Native American identities, the U.S. government had found a way to disconnect them from their lands. And that was part of the U.S. strategy. During the same era in which thousands of children were sent away to boarding schools, a number of U.S. policies infringed on their tribal lands back home. in less than 5 decades, 2/3 of Native American lands had been taken away.
The whole thing was purposeful. And the fact that it has been buried in the history books and not acknowledged is also intentional. And in fact, the same tactics were used in New Zealand, Australia, Canada. All of these countries have acknowledged, apologized, or reconciled in some way, except for the United States.
Over time, the brutality of boarding schools started to surface. And after a 1928 report detailed the horrific conditions at some schools, many began to close. In the 1960s, Indigenous activism rose alongside the civil rights movement. And by the 1970s, that activism forced more schools to shut down. The government handed over control of the remaining boarding schools to tribes to be run in partnership with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. But just as the boarding school era started fading, another assimilation project took shape: adoption. The main goal of this pilot project was to stimulate the adoption of American Indian children to primarily non-Indian adoptive homes. They claimed it was to promote the adoption of the forgotten child, but it was essentially a continuation of the boarding school assimilation tactics. And the strategy came with a financial advantage for the government too. Adoption was cheaper than running boarding schools. But first, adoption officials had to sell white America on the idea of adopting Native American children. Feature stories like this one in Good Housekeeping marketed them to white families. They were described as unwanted, and adoption gave them a chance at new lives. In the end, their media campaign worked. White families wanted Indian adoption. But the problem was, many of these children were not orphans that nobody wanted. They were kids often ripped apart from families that wanted to keep them.
You still will hear stories today of people, my age, older, saying, I remember as a child, the social worker was coming and people would hide their children.
On reservations, social workers used catch-all phrases like child neglect or unfit parenting as evidence for removal. But their criteria was often questionable. Some accounts describe children being taken away for living with too many family members in the same household.
An extended family is a big thing for Native people, and that means being judged for being in a house that's overcrowded. So it's always whiteness is the standard for success, and everything else is judged by that standard.
By the 1960s, about 1 in 4 Native children were living apart from their families. The official Indian Adoption Project placed 395 Native American children into mostly white homes, but it was just one of many in an era of Native American adoptions. Other state agencies and private religious organizations began increasingly making placements for Native American children too.
My mother giving me up was a white person telling her if she didn't, she would never see her other kids again.
In one of the documents I have, it's addressed to my biological father, Victor Fox, that he was trying to look us up to get a hold of us. But Hennepin County wrote, Daniel and Douglas are adapting very well in their new family. Just was totally, it was a false statement.
When you're adopted, you know you're missing something. I think I've likened it to having when someone has a 500-piece puzzle and they have all the pieces to make this pretty picture except one.
My adoptive mother was not well, verbally, physically, and sexually, and spiritually abusive. So by the time I was 14, I started drinking. 15, drugs were added, and I became an addict to numb. I didn't realize I was numbing pain.
I tried suicide, tried slicing my wrist one time.
Children were taken and believed like I believed for a long time that there was something wrong with me versus something wrong with the system.
The Indian Adoption Project was considered a success by the people who set it in motion. Officials claimed, generally speaking, we believe the Indian people have accepted the adoption of their children by Caucasian families and have been pleased to learn the protection afforded these children. But the truth was unsettling.
These hearings on Indian children's welfare is now in session.
Well, I was pregnant with Bobby, and the welfare kept coming over there and asking me if I'd give him up for adoption.
Before he was even born?
Yeah.
They picked up my children and placed them in a foster home. And I think that they were abused in a foster home.
4 years after Native people organized in this Senate hearing, Congress passed the Indian Child Welfare Act, known as ICWA.
It gives tribes a place at the table in court.
States would be required to provide services to families to prevent removal of an Indian child. And in case removal was necessary, they would have to try to keep the child with extended family or another Native American family.
Without our relatives, we cease to exist. So with Native people, part of our wealth is in our family. It's in who we're connected to.
But the legacy of family separation in Native communities has been difficult to fully undo. Today, Native American children are 4 times more likely to be placed in foster care than white children, even when their families have similar presenting problems. In these cases, ICWA is often the best legal protection they have, and it's been under attack repeatedly.
A young girl ripped from her foster family because of the Indian Children Welfare Act.
White adoptive families intent on keeping Native American children have tried to do away with the act, and they're often backed by conservative organizations.
The Indian Child Welfare Act was dealt a blow earlier this month.
The subject of a lawsuit issued on Tuesday by the Goldwater Institute, arguing that preferences given to American Indian families to adopt Indian children is unconstitutional and discriminates based on race.
It's a way for these industries, these very powerful industries, to try to...
Okay, I'm going to hold it right there, and I'm going to go to the book of Lamentation, and I'm going to also share a variety of precepts out of the Bible and see what the Lord say. Okay, we'll start at the book of Lamentations, okay, chapter 4, and I'll start at verse 21. Rejoice and be glad, O daughter of Edom. Edom are the Edomites in the Bible, which is the father of Esau is the father, Salakia. Esau is the father of the Edomites, okay? All right? The so-called white man that dwelleth in the land of Uz. Uz is what you call today the West. Western culture, the West, the U.S., all right? Stolen land, because that stolen land that we just witnessed out of the horse's mouth. Okay? The cup also shall pass through unto thee. Thou shalt be drunken and shalt make thyself naked. So shame is going to cover these Edomites, the so-called white man. Okay? Okay, that's when thou is going to make thyself naked. All right? Because all the earth is seeing the colonization, okay, the imperialism that these devils then use. Just like the devil in the video used savage. Okay, but we're going to look up a couple of definitions. Matter of fact, let's look up savage. Savage, fierce, violence, uncontrolled, okay? Bad or negative, very great severity. I'll say severity, severe. Okay? So, violence, uncontrolled. Okay, let's look up another definition. You guys can look this up yourself if and when you get a chance. Overturn. And I see this definition, this word in a lot of religious movies. That means abolish, invalidate, or reverse a previous system. The results overturn previous findings. Okay? All right? So let's go to continue in 22. Lamentations chapter 4, verse 22. The punishment of thy iniquity is accomplished, O daughter of Zion. So when I read earlier in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 28, okay, in a few verses in Deuteronomy regarding why we're in this condition as the Israelites, because we broke the laws, statutes, and commandments that the Most High gave unto Moses to give to the Israelites. So one of them was we lost our heritage. Okay? We lost our identity. All right? I'm going to read that again. The punishment of thy iniquity is accomplished, O daughter of Zion. That's another name for the Israelites. Okay? He will no more carry thee away into captivity. He will visit thy iniquity, O daughter of Edom. He will discover thy sins. Okay? Because if you go to the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verse 15, let's see what it reads. Then that which have been is now, and that which is to be have already been. And God requires that which is past. Okay? So let's read some of which is past. Okay? Let's go to the book of Exodus chapter 21 and verse 16. The book of Exodus, and I'm going to read chapter 21 verse 16. And he that stealeth a man and selleth him. So we just witnessed thievery, robbery, murder, violence. Okay? All right? I'll read that again. And he that stealeth a man and selleth him, or if he be found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death. Okay? All right? So let's continue. Let's go to the book of Isaiah chapter 33 and 1. Because I like to read precept on precept, line upon line, here a little and there a little. Okay? Because scriptures identify and define themselves. This is Isaiah. Okay? Chapter 33 and verse 1. It says, woe to thee that spoileth, and thou wast not spoiled, and dealt treacherously, and they dealt not treacherously with thee. When thou shalt cease to spoil, thou shalt be spoiled. And when thou shalt make an end to deal treacherously, they shall deal treacherously with thee. Okay? So that is what is going to come upon Edom. Okay, the so-called white man. All right, and also other nations that has partaken actions in identifying under Edom and been drinking the fornication of their ugliness. Let's go to the book of Jeremiah, chapter 30. In verse 16. Okay? And then I'm going to get that what I just described. Jeremiah chapter 30 and verse 16. Therefore all they that devour thee shall be devoured, and all thy adversaries, every one of them shall go into captivity. And they that spoil thee shall be a spoil, and all that preyed upon thee I will give for prey. Okay, I'll continue. Verse 17. For I will restore health unto thee, and I will heal thee of thy wounds, said the Lord, because thou called thee, and outcasts, saying, this is Zion whom no man seeketh after. Okay? So they took advantage of the Israelites. All right? They had a chance, and chances, I use that term, okay, to come clean. But they didn't do that. They didn't do that. Okay? Matter of fact, let's get that. Let's get that in the book of Ezekiel. Okay? Chapter 35, and I'm going to read verse 5. Because thou has had a perpetual hatred, and has shedded the blood of the children of Israel by the force of the sword in the time of their calamity. Okay, so that calamity, that time, was given unto the wicked, which rule the earth. Okay, and our calamity is when we fell as a nation. Okay, that was our calamity. All right, in the time that their iniquity had an end. Okay, verse 6. Therefore, as I live, said the Lord God, I will prepare thee unto blood, and blood shall pursue thee. Said that thou hast not hated blood, even blood shall pursue thee. So the so-called white man had a chance to come clean, just like Canada. They apologized. Okay, that was announced in this video. Australia, they came to some type of agreement and apologized, and not fully, because they didn't give these Native American Indians, so-called, their lands back and their portion. All right, but America have never taken action and brought something that was well, let's just use the 40 acres in a mule. All right, but let's go to the book of Obadiah. Okay, and let's read, because I mentioned something about the other nations also, because the other nations on the outside of Israel are called heathens. This is the book of Obadiah. Okay, chapter 1, and I'm going to read verse, let's see, I'll read verse 15. For the day of the Lord is near upon all the heathens, as thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee. Thy reward shall return upon thy own head. Okay, so I just went through a few verses that's gonna take place in our near future, and actually it's slowly progressing now. All right, so let's get another verse. Let's go to the book of Habakkuk. Okay, chapter 2 and verse 16, and I'm going to end it there. Okay, chapter 2 and verse 16. Thou art filled with shame for glory. Okay, drink thou also, and let thy foreskin be uncovered. There go that uncovering again. Okay, all right. The cup of the Lord's right hand shall be turned unto thee, O daughter of Edom. Basically, I just put that in there. Okay, Salakia for that. All right, I'll read that again. The cup of the Lord's right hand shall be turned unto thee, and shameful spewing shall be on thy glory. So America's always glorifying themselves, of the things that they've conquered, the things that they have, of all the resources and all the beautiful lands and fields. All that is stolen land. All of it. Okay? That was done under imperialism also within other countries. Let's look up a definition. Imperialism, a policy of extending a country's power and in fusing through diplomacy or military force. Okay? All right? Military force. That's my point. All right? So let's see here. I always say it's going to be my last verse, and I tell you, just the spirit just keep going, because these heathens have a lot to pay for the things that they've done to the children of Israel. They really do. Okay, matter of fact, let's get that in Revelation, then I'll end it. Revelations chapter 13. This is a verse that a lot of nations, they don't like this prophecy right here, especially Edom, the so-called white man. The book of Revelation chapter 13, I'll start at 9. If any man have an ear, let him hear. Verse 10. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. Okay, so who led Israel into captivity? Who led the 12 tribes of Israel into captivity? Okay, and stole their heritage. The 1948ers, Amalek, Idumea, the Agagites, the Chaldees. All right, Edom, Esau. All right. Ishmaelites, Moabites, Ammonites, Tyre. Okay? He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Okay? Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. So the saints are the Israelites. All right? That's who the saints are. That's in the book of Psalms, chapter 148, verse 14. Okay, study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that need not to be ashamed, righteously dividing the word of truth. I'm going to end it here and say the water, which means thank you for your time. Shalom.